Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Gaming in the Keats, another 9th Inch Battle Report. And this is a special one because it is my last game in the Berlin Liga. So I'm really excited to get this report to y'all, and hopefully I can make something happen against the Dwarven holds. Alright, so this is the same list that I used in the previous report. No changes here. Going with the two threshing engines with divining snout. The Horde Thresher version, so they do the 3d3 impact hits. Double Wizard Master of Divination and Evocation, I think is really powerful. Brimstone Secretions on both, just in case there's divine attacks. Of course, I don't... I know that dwarves don't have divine attacks, but I'm also trying to make the list in a way where if I was to be using this in, say, just a regular tournament setting, like I'd have those options available. We got the Chilling Yawn, Succubi, and Piercing Spike Myrmidons, Clawed Fiends rerolling, failed to wound against large and gigantic. So again, dwarves, so the only thing I really have to worry about here are potential for Hole Guardians. But yeah, let's see how this list gets on. So for my opponent's list, yeah, he's got a pretty intense gun line. So he's got Clan Marksman with crossbows and great weapons and the Runic Standard of Dismay, so it's -2 to my charge. He's got regular Guildcraft handguns. He's got 2 ballistas, runecrafted, so they scout. He's got a flame cannon. And he's got a regular organ gun. Thank God it's not runecrafted. 2 steam copters, 3 Hole Guardians, 21 seekers, and then he's got 2 big combat blocks, Greybeards, just as is, and then the big unit of Deep Watch, where all of his characters are most likely going to go. So he's got a Smashy King on a throne. So he has that 18-inch Discipline 10 Inspiring Presence, or Commanding Presence, however you want to call it. He's got Battle Standard with a 1-up armor save and the Hold Stone and Rune of Lightning, which is cheeky, and then a Runic Smith with 2 extra battle runes, so that's nice. And now the Deep Watch unit is now AP2, so extra AP. So yeah, this is going to be a tough list to face up against with mine, I think. I mean, we'll see. We'll see what happens here, but I basically have to make a big decision depending upon what the scenario is and what the deployment is. So we'll see what I do. So the deployment is marching columns. I really hate this deployment, I'm not going to lie, but that's just me personally. But it's just because of the, trying to keep track of having to keep the center of one unit further past the other unit. It's just kind of, for me, I find it rather clunky, but it also makes for some interesting moments and interesting deployment options as well. And there's always the unit to ambush, so I see. But for me, I've always just never really enjoyed playing it, but that's my complaint for another time. And we're using map A7, so my opponent, oh my goodness. My opponent won I won to pick sides, so I actually picked this side along here, because I figured I had more cover options from shooting, and my opponent picked, I gave my opponent this side, and so my opponent, of course, started deploying first, from this here left-hand side, and then I started deploying here on my left-hand side there. And so when we picked our hills. Unfortunately, this forest is exactly within 12 inches of the deployment, so I couldn't pick that for my opponent's hill. So I picked the field for my opponent to come and try and get, and then my opponent picked the water feature. So those were our options there. My question is that I already have right now is I did debate about picking the water feature as well to force all of his scoring over into one direction if he wanted to try and defend it, and making it for like an awkward standoff here, or maybe awkward with his blocks and his gun line. But ultimately, I just decided to have the field be where my opponent decides to go, and forcing him to come to me. So let's see if that was a good decision or not. So for magic, I have Scrying, Stars Align, Fate's Judgment, and Unerring Strike on the Courtesan, and then I also have Whispers of the Veil, Hasten the Hour, Spectral Blades, and Touch of the Reaper on the Miser. My opponent has 2 runes of resilience, 1 rune of, so that's -1 to wound, and then 1 rune of gleaming, so that is distracting on his unit. And then he has a rune of revivification, which is a confusing rune for me. It's just, it basically cancels the last one turn spell, and then the next spell casted on that unit, it counts as dispelled, or it just removes the spell effect. So yeah, I don't like that rune a lot. So my pre-game thoughts is this is my last game in the league, and I figured I'm going to try and push, which means it's probably a quote-unquote unstable match. So, that could make things, if the shooting is on point, I could lose units very quickly. However, if I try and push with everything at once, I think I might be able to get there and overwhelm that gun line, and just, my goal here is to just avoid the deep watch. Don't send in points, but because of that, then I know I won't get those points with all those characters, and that's a really expensive unit, so I can't expect a massive win here. And another thing I don't want to have is the greater demons into the slayers, because they're still technically, they get to wound me on 4s, I think, regardless. 4, 5s, and 6s still counts as wounds, so my resilience 7 miser is not a fan of that. And then I think King of the Hill may be tough for me, because if I'm not going for the deep watch, he can just push the deep watch forward, and that's going to be difficult for me to deal with. On the same, and he has more scoring than I do, so it's just I need to eliminate all of his scoring, and then hopefully I have a unit left if they've survived the shooting in combat to be able to score my King of the Hill, but it's uncertain. So I'm thinking, it's roughly a 9-11 score for me, but at the same time, that's more if I play a bit more cagier, but if I'm pushing, then that could easily swing in different directions one way or the other. So it's hence I don't think it's necessarily a quote unquote stable matchup here. So my deployment, from left to right, my opponent drops his crossbows. No, excuse me. My opponent drops a copter first. I drop my clawed fiends. Then my opponent drops the clan's marksman with the crossbows and great weapons here, which I'm actually really happy about because they're in the water, which means they're not steadfast. But at the same time, they're 30 inches away, and so I probably should have anticipated this with my fiends and just deployed them 3.1 inches back, so that he couldn't, he'd have to march in order to shoot me. Or he'd have to march and then couldn't shoot me. So, but then my other thinking was, if I'm pushing, then I need to deploy on the line and just get as close to these, just get my first turn, just try and overwhelm with as many things as possible. So that's why I deployed the way I did. So then I dropped my Furies. My opponent then drops his Greybeards right here, and so then I drop my Threshing Engine, again trying to overwhelm this position. And at that point, my opponent drops everything else in the way that you see it. And then the War Machines and characters, of course, ignore the marching column's deployment option, so they can be deployed anywhere. And then his 2 units, after he saw where I dropped my stuff, then his 2 ballistas scouted. So then what you see here is you have an organ gun, a copter, the flame cannon right here. You have the first ballista, Greybeards, copter number 2, the clan marksman with handguns. Then you have the big deep watch unit with all 3 of his characters in there, King, BSB, Runesmith. You have a unit of Hold Guardians right in the back, and then you have the Slayers up front as well, deployed on the line, and the final ballista. So I have here my Courtesan, which, as you can see, I'm starting the painting process with a combination of oil paints and also trying out contrasts for the first time. So let's see how it goes. My Furies, my Succubi here, which aren't in horde formation, just out of laziness, to be honest, because I don't have the other tray for it. And wanted the game to go, I wanted to try and be as quick as possible here. My second Threshing Engine right here, then the Miser kind of giving this big 18-inch leadership bubble, and then my Myrmidons up on the far side, just trying to say, okay, if you want to come in to the deployment, you're going to be threatened by the Myrmidons in the flank, so you have to be cautious when you advance, essentially. And then, this ballista cannot see the Miser, I don't believe, even though the Miser does -1 damage. So I'm happy with that, I guess. But here I think I could have done things a bit differently. I think I needed to switch the placement of the Succubi and the Myrmidons so that the Succubi were actually going against the Slayers, just because +1 to hit, +1 to wound, and weight of attacks, and more bodies to potentially receive the you're coming with me rule, versus the Myrmidons here, and the Myrmidons going more up against like the heavy armor. So I just misplayed that deployment there. The Courtesan and the Furies are up ready to just pressure and just really try and pressure this gun line here. So my opponent's turn 1 is as such. He doesn't move the clan's marksman here because he doesn't need to. He faces the Greybeards like so, and to be prepared to receive anything I push forward. Same with the marksman here. They marched. He just moves straight up 9 inches, or marches straight up 9 inches with the deep watch and the Slayers. The Hold Guardians stay back, and the Copters get ready to chaff and shoot. I stopped Rune of Resilience on the Slayers, and he put Revivification on the Deep Watch. So with my opponent's shooting, it hurt a bit, but could have been worse. So the organ gun and the combination of the organ gun and the clan's marksman put 5 wounds on the Clawed Fiends, and then one of the shots from the Copters actually, I think, puts a wound on the Threshing Engine. This ballista, I think both ballistas actually end up just missing their targets because he targeted the Threshing Engines, and they already have a built-in -1 to hit, which was pretty nice. So I got off a little bit lucky there. It could have been worse, but I also could have avoided this moment here with the Fiends as well. So that's my mistake there. So my turn 1. Here we go. Well, I charged. This is like, he gave me a 5, and I was just like, let's go, let's charge. I want to start taking off some Slayer bodies to make it easier for the Myrmidons to finish them off. I chaff the Deep Watch. The courtesan moves up in a way where he can't march in front of her with the full 9 without her still being able to charge anything here in this direction. She's threatening, the marksman. She's threatening these war machines right here. She's threatening the clan marksman in the water, so I'm super happy about that. I pushed the fiends as far as they can go. Same with the furies. I have them in a line here, just basically saying, like, well, if you don't deal with the furies are still going to charge you no matter what. So I'm trying, and then the threshing engine is going to charge you as well. So everything here, so I have 1, 2, 3, 4 units just pressuring this gun line, and so let's see what happens with that. In other news, the succubi kind of just shuffle a bit to the left, and the Myrmidons moving away to, unfortunately, if this doesn't go well, I'm still in the Slayer's front, and I think it's either a non-charge or it's a 12, like a 15, 12 to get back into the Myrmidons. I could have pushed them more. I really could have. I could have pushed them in a way where I'm actually on the hill and perhaps threatening some flanks, but at the same time, I just didn't know how this was going to go, and I didn't want to give him a flank with the Slayers on my Myrmidons in case the chariot just dies. But my goal right now is to just put a lot of magic buffs and debuffs into this combat and maybe sneak off a damage spell here or there too. So that being said, magic, I get Stars Align and Spectral Blades up on the Threshing Engine. My opponent stopped Whispers of the Veil on the Seekers. And then I also was able to get a non-boosted Fate's Judgment and put a wound on the Ballista. Okay. So what you're seeing is after combat. With Stars Align, Divine Attacks, and rerolls to wound, I killed 3 Slayers. He puts 1 or 2 wounds back on me. I crumble. Like, I lost the combat, I crumble, and now I have 1 wound remaining on this Threshing Engine. Now, to note, with impact hits, the way that my opponent and I played it this time was that the impact hits did not benefit from the Spectral Blades, and this is non-boosted, so it didn't benefit from the rerolls to wound. And our reasoning was that because impact hits are labeled as a special attack, it technically doesn't count as a melee attack. I think this is wrong, and I've discussed this multiple times actually with other friends of mine who play this game, and I've also played it the other way as well, where the impact hits still get the rerolls. Because it's like you're still in melee. But I think it's like we couldn't find it in the rules of the differentiation in the classification, so we just played it safe and didn't count it, but I think we did this incorrectly here. Where I do think impact hits do get the rerolls, and the reasoning is because rerolls to wound isn't actually labeled as an attack attribute, it's just simply a spell effect. And so it just affects the whole model. It affects the whole unit. Sort of regardless of what type of attacks are going into, what type of attacks you had. However, please comment below if there's like an actual wording or section that clarifies where a special attack would either be also considered a melee attack or would benefit from the spell effect or something like that. At the time of recording, I haven't found it, but, I'm still, researching. It's always a researching sort of question here. But that's how we played it. And that being said, there you have it. Threshing Engine kills 3 Slayers. Alright, so opponent's turn 2. He charges the Furies, go figure. He charges the Furies, go figure. By the way, these are guiding lights up on the Threshing Engine and the Courtesan, just in case I need to do some redirects for my future turn I'd prepped for. And then you see with movement, he takes the Hold Guardian so they can shoot through here and charge anything that comes in if need be. The Handgunner stayed still. The Greybeards came up and are blocking the charge into this ballista. And everything else remains where you see it. And I dispelled a revivification on the chariot, I believe. But then my opponent got up -1 to wound on the Slayers, so a Rune of Resilience up on the Slayers. And in shooting, first of all, you can see all the guns turn on the Fiends and the Furies, and so I'm left with 1 Fury left and 2 full Clawed Fiends left, so that's the Champion and the Standard Bearer. Oh god, that hurt. Oh, that sucked. And then of course, the Slayers finish off the Chariot, no problem. And you can also see the Deep Watch finishing off the Furies. Alright, my turn 2. Well, here we go. So, the Fiends charge the Organ Gun and fail their charge. They needed a 7 on Swift Stride, and they fail it. I had options with the Courtesan. I could have charged the Handgunners. However, I was worried that they would stick. Like, I wouldn't, even though I was potentially break their Steadfast, or I would be breaking their Steadfast, but I was worried that they would stick and I'd just get countercharged, and I didn't want that to happen. So instead, I declared the Courtesan into the crossbows. They stood, and they passed their terror check, of course. And then I charged the Threshing Engine into the crossbows. He did a stand and shoot and did no wounds, it looks like. And so the final Fury is sacrificing itself dearly to chaff the Greybeards. And I also have it done in a way where the Greybeards have a flank onto it, so they'll come in towards the center. The Hold Guardians have a front, and so if they charge it, they would just overrun into this space here and not hit anything. As you can see, I took the Courtesan off the base because she has a lot of pokey bits, but her base is actually here, and the idea is to overrun into the Flame Cannon and then have the Chariot overrun into the Copter, tying down these 2 units, at least. And then starting to sweep in this way, hoping that the Fiends survive. But yeah, the Fiends failing the charge that one hurt. I'm not happy about that. And then, of course, in other news, you see the Myrmidons charging into the Slayers. Again, I don't think this is a good idea. I think I'm really misplaying the center here. For whatever reason, I chose to just march the Succubi up and say, you can't charge the flank of the Myrmidons, you're just going to have to charge the Succubi. And I'm hoping I can maybe do some damage to the Deep Watch as they come in, and then of course they'd be taking some DTs as well. But I'm not guaranteed this unit because of how many wounds the Slayers can potentially do back to me even when they die. And I'm essentially giving up the Succubi as well, so I'm giving up these 2 units here for maybe a unit of Slayers. So this was just this is not a good play by me. And then I put my miser in a way where I'm threatening some flanks here, but the problem is I'm actually not looking at this ballista. I really could have just pushed him further to do the same thing, but also see the ballista. So this is, again, poor placement on my part. I'm not happy about this. As I look back on this, with magic, I get a spectral blades up on the myrmidons. I get a stars align up on the courtesan, and my opponent dispelled whispers of the veil on the slayers. So close combats. So first, here's what happened with the slayers. It's just brutal. You know, I kill a bunch of him. He kills a bunch of me. I win the combat, but Slayer's unbreakable. Weehaw. So he basically just reforms out wide to get more models into, to get more attacks in. They actually did a lot more than I thought they would going back at me. Yeah, that sucked. And I wasn't making great Aegis saves either. So, yeah, good God. That did not go how I expected. And then, yeah, I kill the crossbows, but, so my courtesan goes, she takes out like 5 or 6. The chariot comes in, takes out the last, say, 4. So the whole back rank is gone, or something to that effect, or maybe not. However many were left, my opponent put all of his attacks on the threshing engine and just kills it outright. 6 wounds, and I didn't make a single Aegis save, and that just happens. Crap. So this is massive, actually. Again, because now he has a chaff piece, a shooting piece open, and I have 1 less piece to pressure his gun line and to pressure his units. And I've just given up another 300 points. So, crap. Yep. Not happy about that. But at least I did enough wounds back with the courtesan, so my opponent needed a 5 to stick because he's not steadfast in the water, and he was not within BSB reroll range, and he broke, thank goodness, and I ran them down. Everyone here passed their panics, no problem. So on to Dwarven holds, turn 3. So my opponent moves the copters over here to shoot at the fiends. I'm actually a bit surprised. I think he could have moved it in a way to just chaff the fiends and still shoot, and it's the same effect. But he chose to not do that. My opponent turns around the graybeards to look at the courtesan. And yeah, and of course my opponent charges the succubi, and then my opponent is able to get a revivification off on the myrmidons, so it removes my rerolls to wound, so that's not good. And shooting, yup, I'm left with the champion left with 2 wounds remaining. So, ouch. You're paying for failing the charge, Claude Fiends. Really needed you to make that charge. So yeah, that sucked. And furthermore, the Myrmidons don't kill all the Slayers. There's 2 left, so they're unbreakable. And yep. Oh, and you can also see a Rune of Resilience onto the Deep Watch, because of course, I mean, at this rate, like, I know my succubi are probably dead. Speaking of which, this is after Crumble. The charge actually puts a dangerous terrain onto the BSB here, which is kind of funny. But I don't do anything to the Deep Watch, and he absolutely just murders the unit, and I'm left with kind of, I guess this is a good thing, probably not. I'm left with 3 models left. So, yeah, that's frustrating. Oh, and excuse me. As you can see, the Greybeards actually decided to come this way to support this unit of Deep Watch, because I guess they don't need it, or yeah. Oh yes, and then this happened, which also I think is kind of good. The courtesan whiffs and only does 4 wounds to the flame cannon, and in return takes a wound, which sucked. And the flame cannon is stubborn, so the flame cannon sticks, which is kind of good because then the courtesan doesn't get shot. Or this is my turn. Oh yeah. Yeah. So the courtesan will be yeah. This actually is not good. No, this is definitely not good. I need the courtesan to have killed this thing so I could charge on my turn. So yeah, that's a bummer. That flame cannon needed to die. I just rolled a bunch. I rolled like a bunch of 1s on my thunderstomp and rolled a bunch of 1s, even with rerolls to hit. Like I whiffed. Yep, there you have it. So, Demon Legion's turn 3. I do finally make it into the Organ Gun with the Clawed Fiend Champion. I moved the Miser again in a way to threaten flanks and rears and stuff, but, you know, that was my decision there. But I also do it in a way where once he kills the succubi, he can't, he's not going to get a legal charge. This is over 15 inches away, I believe, into the Miser, and so he can only then charge the Myrmidons at that point. With magic, a snipe does a wound on the Hold Guardians, and my opponent dispelled scrying on the court for that extra minus hard target, so then the court would have been -3 to shoot at it. And combat, my Myrmidons finally killed the last 2 Slayers, and I reform like so, blocking the Deep Watch. And the Fiend does 3 wounds to the Organ Gun, but doesn't kill it. It sticks on a stubborn, and we're locked in combat. So, my opponent's turn 4. My opponent charges with the Hold Guardians here, with the intention that once he does this, if I choose to charge the Hold Guardians with the Miser, then if I chose to overran, I'd be running into the front here. The Greybeards turn around to look at the courtesan. Handgunners are more than 9 inches away from the courtesan, so they can still do a stand and shoot if they choose to. The copters come over here to shoot at the courtesan. And so in the magic phase, my opponent gets gleaming off on the Greybeards to make them distracting, so I'm actually hitting them on 5s because they have parry from the courtesan, which is not fun. And he also gets Rune of Resilience on the Hold Guardians, and then I stop Revivification. So with all the shooting that's left, my opponent does 2 more wounds to the courtesan, so that's not great. And my Clawed Fiend actually is able, in close combat, my Clawed Fiend is actually able to finish off the last 2 wounds on the Organ Gun, which means I now get a juicy flank target here and a potential overrun into the second copter if the Fiend does well. And here the Hold Guardians mop up the Myrmidons as expected, and they just go 3 wide this way to face the Miser. So in my turn, I choose to not charge either the courtesan into the Greybeards or the clan marksman. I'd actually made a mistake, and I could have positioned the courtesan in a way to charge this ballista here, but I didn't do that. But I actually, I'm happy with my decision, to be honest. Just because now I have potential to do damage spells, and now to take off some units here, and to pressure flanks and rears and things like that. So forcing my opponent to keep turning around and outmaneuvering him. And I also move my miser in a way where the Hold Guardians cannot see him, and then the Deep Watch cannot charge him, because the Hold Guardians are blocking the Deep Watch. Now, he could actually charge out with one of his characters if he wanted to, and then actually reform and then start going towards the objective, which probably wouldn't have been a bad idea. I don't know. Like, the Miser's not great in combat. He's just a tank, and so it would have held up the Miser, and then he could have, reformed and then popped the Miser with combat res. This is what I'm thinking here. So that could have been an option, I think, there. But yeah, my opponent stops unerring strike. I failed a boosted hasten the hour here onto this unit, but then a Fate's Judgment boosted kills this ballista, so at least I got some points there. That's one less ballista shooting at me. And then here's a mistake I made with the Clawed Fiends when I charged in. By the way, as you can see, the Fiend didn't do anything to the copter, and instead I took a wound in return for my hubris. So I have a charge and a flank. He has a wound. My opponent sticks, and now I just made this mistake, and this is the laser pointer showing that the other copter, the front, can actually charge the Fiend. And I did this because this was the King of the Hill, and I figured, well, if I'm locked up here, I'm touching the objective. So right now I'm winning the objective, but that gave my opponent a charge, and I didn't see that at first, and I should have double-checked this, and I didn't. So I'm about to pay for that. And sure enough, the other copter comes flying in. My opponent reforms the Greybeards to face the Courtesan. Same with the Clan Marksmen, and they're ready to flee for the impending charge. The Hold Guardians move out of line of sight of the Miser, and they're just trying to conserve their points. And the Deep Watch turn in a way so that they can go towards the objective, but still keeping the Miser in the front arc. So that being said, my opponent gets a Rune of Resilience onto the Deep Watch, and shooting, unfortunately, this ballista hits with a 6 to hit, gets the wound, and puts one more wound on the Courtesan. So, and by the way, I hadn't mentioned it at this point, but in case y'all were wondering, the hatreds, the grudges, these are the yellow tokens here. The succubi were grudged, the Miser was grudged, and the Courtesan was grudged. So, just so you know. Yeah. And surprise, the other copter kills the Fiend, so now I've lost the objective, and I've lost that whole unit of Fiends. So the only 2 units I actually have left on the field are Courtesan with 2 wounds remaining, and a Miser at full health. So let's see what I do. Oh yeah, and that's just a double ugh picture of my fault. I made that mistake, and paying for it. So the copter kills the Fiend, and I don't, of course, do anything back to either of the copters, so that's super annoying. here's what it looks like. It's actually a draw. I killed this many Deep Watch from the courtesan. She did a good job this time. The miser takes a wound because he's -1 multi-wound damage, which is great. And so with all the combat res aside, 2 banners, 1, 2, 3 ranks, a wound, and I did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and a charge. Yeah, it ends up being a draw. Like, we worked it out and it was a draw. So yeah, I'm happy about that so far. So in my opponent's turn 6, the marksmen rally. The Greybeards can't really do anything at this point. So my opponent is able to get another Rune of Resilience, but I stop a Revivification, which is nice. I was able to stop everything else that went through, but I did let a Rune of Resilience go up onto the Deep Watch. And so, with that being said, it's another draw. So I killed a few more Deep Watch. Deep Watch don't do anything to the courtesan. The king doesn't do anything to the miser. Surprise, the miser doesn't do anything to the king. And yeah, we're just stuck there now. So it's going into my last turn. I've effectively stopped my opponent from scoring the objective here. But, which is great, I do get a magic phase. So, in my magic phase, I'm able to get a Spectral Blades up on the courtesan again. My opponent stops Whispers of the Veil. And then I get a Distracting again on the miser. And a Guiding Light as well up on the miser. So that being said, yeah. It's now up to the miser and the courtesan to see if they can bring home the bacon here. And so my opponent rolls his dice for the Deep Watch. I kill a few more Deep Watch with the courtesan, but nothing too spectacular. I think I rolled another one, I think my opponent actually made a couple of clutch Aegis saves as well. So the courtesan just needs to survive. My opponent rolls the 8 dice, and then I see all the 5s and 6s to hit, and I'm like, oh no. And then he rolls, I think, 5 more dice, and he rolls the 3 wounds on the courtesan, so I need to make 2 of these 5-up Aegis saves. And no! And the courtesan dies. So now I'm like, frickin' crap. Damn it. So the courtesan goes down with 2 wounds. So now, can the miser survive? But yes, you do see a wound marker on the king. I do have the miser was able to ironically put a wound up on the king here in this combat. The king doesn't do anything to me in return. But because the courtesan dies, I've lost by 3. Because he has at least 2 ranks, 2 banners, 2 wounds. I have a single wound. Yeah, and so I'm on minimize discipline. So I roll the dice for the minimized. with the points added up, it ends up being a 15-5 with a drawn objective. Had I not charged the courtesan in, let's say she'd kept her point or kept all of her points, it would have been a 6-14. So, I wanted to at least see if the courtesan and the miser together could break that unit of deep watch, or maybe do at least enough damage to do something cool. But not today. Oh well. So with my post-game thoughts here, I don't think I did a great job with my deployment personally. I could have avoided some of the turn 1 shooting, knowing that my opponent went first, and I could have switched my... I could have put another scoring unit that had closer to be able to push up onto the lake in my opponent's deployment zone. The reason why I didn't at first is because I wanted to stay out of range of that flame cannon. I wanted my infantry to stay out of range of the flame cannon. And but I still could have at least put myself in a position for later turns, knowing that hopefully the gun line would be collapsing and the courtesan would have gotten into the flame cannon. At least that would be the goal, is that then I could start pushing into the lake in the late game, and also threatening, say, that unit of graybeards. I could have also chosen the same hill. I was thinking about that as well. I don't know if that is 100% the right play here. But it would have meant that all of my opponent's forces would have been really concentrated around getting into the lake and would have been blocking. I think it would have been awkward for my opponent. But who knows? With reforms and combats and everything, if I'm pushing that way regardless, then maybe maybe it wouldn't have been as bad for my opponent. But I also didn't really utilize my damage spells this game. There were a few moments where, I was able to take off, for example, the ballista, but I didn't really utilize my sniping. I was just really focused on close combat, and I think I could have done a better job at changing up the types of threats I issued to my opponent here. And then, I didn't avoid the deep watch at all. I didn't follow my game plan. So I basically just fed that unit points. But that goes into a larger picture of knowing when to trade and when to just continue to avoid that unit at all costs, And so I didn't play that very well. I knew going into the game that I needed to just not send units into the deep watch, but I just didn't do that. So I didn't follow my game plan, and I was punished for it. The Slayers were really frustrating to deal with. Oh my god. I think the Succubi honestly were probably the better unit to deal with the Slayers, aside from, say, using the courtesan's range damage like Unrang Strike and Fate's Judgment. But had I done that, then I wouldn't be pressuring the gun line, So it was might have had to have just said avoid the Slayers, or just really make it so that I'm countercharging the Slayers with everything, so to ensure that I kill the unit. With, say, the Chariot and the Myrmidons, and maybe the Miser if I can corner clip. But yeah, I didn't do a good job of playing the Slayers. I mean, I had the misplay with the Succubi. And just feeding them to the Deep Watch. And then, the Fiends failing their charge into the Organ Gun was pretty big, as well as the engine just deciding to fail all of its 6 Aegis saves, and my opponent rolling really well and I rolling terribly, and the engine just dying outright to Dwarven crossbows. That was unexpected. So that really, I think that hurt in the long run as well. So anyway, those are my thoughts on the game. And there you have it. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching again. I'm going to be doing a concluding video on the league itself and just my experiences playing everyone, and just, again, not just a massive thanks to my opponent here today, but just a thank you to everyone who's participated in these battle reports and all my opponents. I've just had an absolute blast playing in the league, but I'll do a wrap-up video on that after this battle report. So that being said, thanks for watching once again, and ciao ciao for now, y'all.